Revelation 2845. From the 10th of August 1943. New banishment. Death before still possibility of ascent in the hereafter. Only the imperfect spirit has to travel the earthly path again, which has proven itself to be completely distant from God at the end of the redemption period and thus would never develop upwards in the beyond either. And that is why many people who still have the possibility of higher development in the beyond will die beforehand, so that they will not belong to those who have to experience the end of the earth period and thus the new banishment into the solid form of the newly formed earth. In the spiritual kingdom, however, the latter would belong to the lowest spheres and even then still move further and further away from God, so that after an infinitely long time they would likewise become solid form. Thus their spiritual substance would be taken again for the creation of new material creations, and only after an exceedingly long time could they cover their course of development on earth. On the one hand, the spiritual substance which leaves earth before then has an advantage in that it can develop more quickly in the beyond than on earth, providing it musters the will to do so, that it comes to realization either in the last hour before its passing or through the efforts of the beings of light in the beyond. But if it does not strive upwards and retains its ignorance in the spiritual kingdom and remains defensive and resistant, then it will sink ever deeper until God completely withdraws his spirit of love from it and allows the spiritual substance to become a solid form again. But this requires a much longer period of time before this spiritual substance is allowed to travel the path on earth again. People cannot measure the agony of renewed earthly progress, otherwise it would be easier for them to understand why so much suffering passes over the earth, which can still influence the human being's attitude, his will and his attitude towards God. However, the fact that many people increase their distance from God through suffering is due to the fact that they live in error, that they are blind in spirit and yet do not want to accept the light of day when it is offered to them. A clear explanation of the truth would be able to change their thinking, yet in the darkest night they still close their eyes and don't notice the light which would allow them to recognize the path they should take. But they cannot be helped in any other way than that the truth is brought to them. And they must also willingly accept it in the beyond if they want to ascend. Their will is only bound in the solid form, then the spiritual substance is not responsible itself but it has to move according to God's will and only becomes somewhat freer when it declares itself willing to be of service. This is why people on earth, despite greatest earthly adversity and tribulation, still have a far greater advantage over the bound spiritual substance, for their will is free and can therefore create a change for itself as soon as the human being merely desires to live in truth, to recognize what is true and to become knowledgeable. Then he will be spared a renewed being bound in the solid form, although he will now be called away from earth prematurely. For then he can enter the spiritual kingdom where this truth he desires will be offered to him and he will enter the path of ascent. And therefore, at the end of this earthly period there will only be completely God-remote and a few God-connected people on earth, and the final separation will take place. The latter will eternally belong to God and the former will have to take the path of unspeakable suffering in the bound will. In the creations of the new earth. Amen.